This is such an interesting section of text because we so easily read it and we so easily misread it. There are so many things we think we know that we don't know well, and there are so many things that we should know that we overlook so very quickly. For example, beginning with the triumphal entry, and you remember that I questioned whether that was really all that triumphal because it really had to do with those who were traveling with him more than the entrance to Jerusalem. All of the throwing down of the cloaks and the words of Hosanna actually occur apparently coming down the mountain on the east side of Jerusalem well before they enter the city. But those who are shouting Hosanna and those who are laying down garments, spreading cloaks, spreading branches that they had cut in the fields, and anticipating the coming kingdom of David, I would suggest they don't understand what Jesus is coming to do. Jesus does not use this as a teaching occasion to try to correct them, but I think they're looking for a Messiah. They recognize someone who could be the Messiah, but they're still looking for a Messiah that will fit their particular understandings and their particular desires more than the spiritual Messiah that Jesus comes to be. They're looking for the physical, militant king who will come and will be able to rescue them from the Romans. And so it seems to me that as we read that, we have to read it through the eyes of those Old Testament quotes. Blessing is the coming kingdom of our father David, looking for the restoration of the Davidic kingdom. Jesus enters Jerusalem, but does not stay. He looks around, it says, at everything. Went to the temple, chapter 11, verse 11, and then went back out to Bethany. The next day they come in. I won't go through again the way that the two fig tree accounts are then a frame for the clearing of the temple or for the disqualification of the temple. But it seems that the point very clearly is that Judaism will be no more. That this is definitely about Judaism if you think about the point of the two fig tree stories. And then we read over this so very, very easily, so very, very quickly. They've left the temple the second day, consecutive day. They come back to the temple the third day. That's when they see the fig tree withered. They arrive in Jerusalem. They go to the temple, 11:27. And the rest of our reading today has to do with the time in the temple. And we know this so well. We know the story of the authority of Jesus. We know the rejection of Judaism. We understand the parable of the tenants. We marvel as they are amazed at Jesus' response concerning paying taxes to Caesar. We've heard the story about the Sadducees and marriage and the resurrection. And we've read several times the Great Command and love God and love your neighbor. And even the question about the Psalms and the reference to whose son is the Christ. And so all of that becomes so familiar to us, we just pass over it. And really in Mark's gospel, it's relatively limited. It's relatively short in comparison to the teaching that he's done. It's amazing that those who are opposing him are willing to let him teach. But I think they're looking for something in his teaching that would trap him. Now, the thing that I perhaps should have mentioned as I was going through, because now we have to go through again, if you go through that entire text and you look for references to the disciples, you're not going to find very many. You're going to find sending two of his disciples in chapter 11. You're going to see that they go out of the city, so that seems to be a reference to Jesus and also his disciples. The disciples are the ones who hear him say, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." They arrive in Jerusalem, 11:27, likely a reference to the disciples. But when we read that reference, we don't see the disciples again. I suppose they were there listening to all of his teaching. We don't see the disciples again until he calls them to him at the end of chapter 12, calling his disciples to him. I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. So with our focus on discipleship, we come to a section of text where it's a little bit fuzzy. It's not really clear, except I would say that they're learning. In our previous class, one of the questions that we have at the end of the class is always, now what are we going to do? And I think Diana's response was, we're going to keep learning. That's the challenge that we have. We're going to keep learning. What I want to do, the response I want to make is, I want to keep learning. And I think that's what they're doing. As they're listening, as they're observing, as they're seeing their rabbi, their master in action, they're learning. And that's what it's all about. He calls them together and teaches them generosity. And then as they leave the temple, this is the third day, that would be Tuesday. The first one was on Sunday, the day after the Passover, Sunday, and then Monday, and then Tuesday, Palm Sunday, as we often call it. So we have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And as they're leaving the temple on Tuesday, we have the question that's raised. The question of Mark is not the question of Matthew. In Matthew, we have a different question. Matthew's writing to a Jewish audience. They had misunderstandings that we can see also in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. So in Matthew's account, we get two related questions, but different questions. Here we have two aspects of the same matter. It is, when will these things happen? When will they begin to happen? And when will these things be done? When will they be completed? And so it's one matter that they want to know about. They want to know how long it's going to last, when's it going to start, when's it's going to end. And as I tried to point out in the video, Jesus is very clearly focused on the Roman Jewish conflict that resulted in the destruction of the temple. That's the question that they're raising. And then we have the statement of chapter 13 and verse 30 concerning the fig tree. This generation will surely not pass until all of these things have happened, and the watchfulness. That's a complex matter. I am preparing, in my difficult passages series, I am preparing a video, hopefully be ready before the end of this month, the end of May in 2020. I am preparing a video that will do some work in this text and probably eventually in all of the parallel texts to try to make some sense out of what we're reading and seeing here. But those are just some very quick observations that maybe will be helpful, give us some orientation as we come to discuss our three questions before we conclude class today. Thanks for giving me that little bit of time. I always find it quite enjoyable to go back through the text and look at some things that maybe didn't get the kind of attention that I would like to give them today.